Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Firas Patel. Jazakallah so much for staying with us. Of course, this Monday our Talking Point will be for 24 minutes. And we have to start, of course, with the tragedy that happened at the Nuseirat refugee camp over the weekend, where the Israeli military slaughtered at least 274 Palestinians and wounded nearly 700 more in a raid. 4 Israeli captives held by Hamas were also rescued during the assault. But for many more Palestinian families, they have lost more loved ones yet again. Joining us now to discuss this, I'd like to welcome Neta Golan, who is the co-founder of the International Solidarity Movement and a member of Israelis Against Apartheid. Neta, assalamu alaikum, and jazakallah so much for joining us on what was really a tragic and sad weekend.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Neta, this all could have been avoided quite clearly if Israel had accepted the original draft of a ceasefire. But of course, there's no real appetite for that from the Israeli cabinet. And we find ourselves at what had happened just this past weekend.
Yes. Also, this operation in itself, I mean, in its military operations in the Gaza Strip from October 7th, Israel has been using, the Hannibal directive. Like, we know from Israeli sources that tanks fired on a house in Be'eri, killing, hostages there, that hostages from party goers from this Nova festivals were shot at from helicopters, and that they've killed hostages, their own hostages in Gaza, knowingly that they have bombed places where they knew the hostages were in order to kill the Hamas operatives that were holding them. So this operation that did free 4 of the hostages, the intention of the operation was Netanyahu's political longevity and to be able to continue to avoid a ceasefire and to continue to avoid, and continue to avoid accountability. Continue to avoid an agreement. So, because like you say, an agreement could have freed all these hostages. From October 7th itself, there was an offer of Hamas to release all the civilians in exchange for Israel not entering the Gaza Strip, which Israel refused. So the release of the hostages, as of course, we would want all hostages, including, the 4,300 Palestinians in Israeli jails, of which 3,410 are without charge being held. We would want everyone reunited with their families and liberated. But of course, the price of hundreds of deaths of innocent people and hundreds more wounded is unacceptable, and the release of the hostages is not the real goal here.
Neta, I think both you and I can agree that Israel, through the United States of America, has technological advancements within their army that can go ahead, just rescue these hostages and bring them back out. But was the intention of the IOF, and it's quite clearly when you look at this genocide, over 37,000 lives have been taken, that the idea was, well, we're going to rescue the hostages, but we're also going to prove a point that we can kill more Palestinians. I know you're not a military expert, but from a humanitarian perspective, I mean, it's daylight, isn't it? It's clear for everyone to see that that was probably the intention.
The fact, if they had this information that these hostages were here, and what Israel is trying to say within Israel, that all the hostages are kept in dungeons, in tunnels, dungeons are the Palestinian hostages, but that the Israeli hostages are all kept in the tunnels, underfed, systematically abused, also sexually abused. There's all these stories that are coming out, which of course, and that they're all held by Hamas, which in this case, that these are hostages that were held by families. And the not in the conditions not in the conditions that Israel describes, and also not in the conditions, in the horrible, horrifying conditions in which Israel is holding Palestinian prisoners. My friend Bassem Tamimi was just released from administrative detention, held without trial. You know, he was starved and abused and faced medical neglect, things that we are, you know, which all the Palestinian prisoners / hostages are facing. But to your question, I imagine that this, you know, this release of these prisoners, well, first of all, we know it could have been achieved by negotiations, and it probably could have been achieved by military means. But like you said, I'm not a military expert. I think that if the price, you know, it's clear that the wanton killing was not a necessity, not a military necessity. I mean, you have a family in the building where some of the hostages were taken. Apparently, we're not even sure, where the parents and the grandfather were murdered in front of their children, just shot. I can't see any, you know, and of course these are three of the murdered among the hundreds that were murdered. Any military necessity to that. So yes, part of it is definitely just a show of force, and just a continuation of the genocide in order to you know, get rid of Palestinians so that Israel can control Gaza and all of historical Palestine.
Neta, then 24 hours later, Benny Gantz and some other cabinet ministers decide, well, they're walking away from all of this. There's a bit of trouble for Benjamin Netanyahu, isn't there? Because Benny Gantz, of course, even though he's a political rival, was seen as this key figure within the Israeli military's genocide that's occurring in Gaza. What is the word, I mean, amongst, you know, your fellow Israelis that are obviously fighting for the cause of Palestine right now? What is their take, along with yours, on Israel really being put in a corner right now, and the fact that Benny Gantz was brought in for one reason and one reason only, to quote unquote defeat and crush Hamas, but he hasn't done that since October the 7th?
Yeah, I want to say that those of us who are working, Israelis against apartheid and Israelis against the genocide, we are working, you know, for our Palestinian, you know, brothers and sisters and relations in humanity, but we're also working for ourselves. I mean, supporting what the United States is doing in supporting Israel in this genocide, and supporting Israel in becoming this genocidal you know, entity in the Middle East is not doing Israelis any favors. I'm sure it's you know, for their interests, the interests of the Americans supporting Israel in this direction is to look after their own interests. But in Israeli interests, you know, there's, you know, I don't know who would want to live literally on the bodies of the people, of the natives of the land that they're living in, and to be a hated entity among where you live. Like they're damning themselves to a life of ongoing war, which I guess is in the interest of some, but it's definitely not in the interest of Israelis who want to live in peace, you know, in this region. So I'm not sure if that, about Benny Gantz, you know, it does seem that, you know, Biden is backing him. I mean, we don't know who now in the Security Council, when they say that the hostage deal is offered by Israelis, while at the same time Netanyahu is not accepting it. So it seems that the Americans and the Europeans are trying to get behind Gantz's corner in his struggle with Netanyahu. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, of course, we all want to see, first of all, we want to see a ceasefire and we want to see the genocide end. So it would be wonderful to see this government dismantled, but it's not like the agenda of Gantz is very different than the agenda of Netanyahu. It's perhaps more, you know, less extreme, so more easily digested by, you know, American and European audiences than the current genocide, which I think is really upsetting so many people around the world. But it's not an agenda that aims to dismantle Israeli apartheid and the system of domination, which the United States and Europe support in Israel and Palestine.
Neta, unfortunately, time has run out. Thank you so much for joining us, for making the time for us. We really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu.
That's Neta Golan. She's the co-founder of International Solidarity Movement and a member of Israelis Against Apartheid. After the break, I will stick on the theme of Palestine. We're going to be speaking to Khalid Kuzmar, who is part of the defense of Palestinian children. The United Nations have announced that Israel is joining the list of shame of countries failing to protect children in conflicts. Do stay tuned.